Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tax March Relief Now Facebook Town Hall. I'm Angela Peoples. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an organizer, I'm a small business owner, I'm a mama, and I'm also the Tax March Advisory Board member. Tonight, we'll be talking about the need for full, fast, and fair COVID stimulus package, focusing on the importance of getting relief to people who are struggling to make ends meet during these very challenging times. We are almost a year into one of the most devastating crises this country has ever seen. The coronavirus pandemic has resulted in the death of 500,000 Americans. It's left millions more with lifelong pre-existing conditions and left even more of us with grief, emotional trauma, and loss. The relief bills passed by Congress last year, which feels like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, has provided just a fraction of what we needed to get people through this crisis and to jumpstart our path forward. That's why Tax March, our partners and organizers across the country are calling on lawmakers to immediately pass a robust relief package that puts funds directly in the hands of people who need it. As the wealthiest country in the world, the United States has more than enough resources to care for its people. What we cannot afford is leaving millions of people sick, unemployed, drowning in debt, unhoused, unpaid, underpaid. We need relief now. We're committed to working together to make it abundantly clear that the federal lawmakers must take action to save people's livelihoods and lives. Only then will our country be able to move forward from this crisis. Before we dive in, I want to remind you all that this is an opportunity for us to hear from experts, but also to share your stories in this live stream. One of the best ways that we're going to be able to feel connected to move forward with relief is to be able to hear and share our stories and experiences about this pandemic, how it's affecting us, how it's affecting our neighbors, how it's affecting our loved ones. So please feel free to share your story on social media. If you're watching this on Facebook, please share on Facebook or Twitter, and you can use the hashtag #ReliefNow. And when you share your stories, we're going to bring those into the conversation as we're discussing it with our panelists and with our experts. So please use the hashtag #ReliefNow so that we can amplify your experiences and we can all feel connected towards this fight for relief now. Now we're going to move into our panel conversation, and we're joined by some incredible activists, some leaders that I admire, and allies, folks that are really going to give us their perspectives on how the circumstances are in their communities and why we need relief now. First, we have Indi Dedagupta. He's the co-director of the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality, where he leads work to develop and advance policy recommendations that alleviate poverty and inequality, advance racial and gender equity, expand economic inclusion for all people in the United States. Indi is also one of my board members with the Tax March. Thanks for being here tonight, Indi. We're also joined with Angela Lange. Angela serves as the Executive Director of Black Leaders Organizing for Communities, or BLOC. In the past, Angela has served as both an organizer and State Council Director for the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, and working on multiple campaigns, including the Fight for 15, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. Before joining BLOC, Angela was also the political director for our future Wisconsin, a partner of Tax March. And finally, we're also joined by Kenya Slaughter. Kenya is an essential worker at Dollar General in Louisiana, who has continued to work throughout the COVID-19 pandemic while caring for her young daughter with autism. She's a community organizer with Power Coalition for Equity and Justice and with Step Up. She's been using her experience to advocate for frontline workers, including a $15 minimum wage and hazard pay, publishing her opinions in the New York Times just last year. Thank you, Kenya. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Indi, for being here. I just want to kick off the conversation because I'm really excited to hear from you all. And I'm actually going to start with you, Angela. When you look at your community during this pandemic, what are some of the specific needs that you're seeing, right? We had COVID, two relief packages that were passed last year, but we know that that has not been enough. So what are some of the specific needs that you're seeing in your communities? And please feel free to share a little bit about yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Angela, and thanks to my fellow panelists. I'm really excited for this conversation. My name is Angela Lange. I use she, her pronouns. I am the founder and executive director of Block, Black Leaders Organizing for Communities, based in Milwaukee. Block launched in 2017 in a lot of ways as a response to the 2016 election. And we said, you know what, we're not going to wait for candidates or elected officials to approach us. We're going to do this work ourselves. And we see now in 2020 how important it was that we were able to push out resources, even in the midst of an election. For folks that remember in April of last year, we had a pandemic election. But it was important for us to not just talk about the election, but to also see people as full people. And so it was get out the vote, it was GOTV, and we weren't leading with a candidate. We were saying, hey, do you need to be connected to resources? Do you need help? What do you need as a community? And that was really important for us. And a lot of what we're seeing, point blank, people need money in their hands to provide for their families. This, trickle down, we're going to bail out corporations or we're going to bail out landlords. But really, we need resources to tenants. We need basic resources to provide for food and back payments on rent, because we're not forgiving rent at this point. We're not forgiving a lot of these bills. The bills continue to pile up. So either you put a freeze on some of these bills or you give people the resources to be able to provide for themselves. And we also see that people are also struggling to find resources and just even find basic information about what they need, unfortunately. And so it's imperative that we are working and uplifting the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, and the working class, and understanding how all the time there isn't a debate back and forth about how many tax breaks we're giving to corporations, but now we are debating back and forth between $1,400, $1,600, $2,000, all of which is actually a fraction, quite frankly, of what people need, because these checks are not even occurring on a regular basis. Having relief checks once every couple months is just unacceptable.
Yeah, once every couple of months, and we're not even sure if they're coming, when they're coming. I heard you say a couple of things. One is that people need consistency in their relief. And I also heard you lifting up that what we're seeing a lot is where the government or elected leaders are failing to act. We're seeing so much engagement from our communities, from activists, from organizers, really stepping into that gap. Kenya, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about yourself and how you're seeing the specific needs in your community in this moment for pandemic and relief. Oh, we can't hear you.
There I am.
There you go.
Yeah, I was muted. I apologize. I thought you guys were muting it. We need PPE, access to resources. They need education on the vaccines. We need access to the vaccines. Our community needs to be re-educated on the impact COVID has had on essential workers, and we need pandemic pay to continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate you listing off those things and the real specificities. Particularly, I think folks were forgetting about the need, the lack of PPE, right? At the beginning
Definitely.
of the pandemic, that was a lot of urgency, but folks are still going to work, having to provide that for themselves, and getting that as a part of relief would be important.
Extremely important. That's one of the things that I spoke about in my op-ed for the New York Times. Like working at Dollar General and working in retail in general, there was a very present lack of PPE. In here where I am in Alexandria, Louisiana, people are not required, like they're supposed to, but people come into stores without masks all the time. So we definitely need PPE for ourselves, and we also need PPE to be able to give to customers and other people in communities and the homeless people. Like, everybody needs PPE. We need access to it, and we need education on it. We need education on this vaccine because, in my community, some people are anti the vaccine because of the history of vaccines and what they do and what people, so it's important. We definitely need PPE, and we need those resources.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the vaccine, both the need for education, but even the need for access as well.
Exactly.
I'm wondering if you can share, if we can pick up on this thread about the vaccine. It's essential, right, to getting to a place where it's safe for folks to gather, it's safe for children to be into school. But we're also seeing some disparities, right, along how people are having access to it. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, and also give us a little bit of an understanding about what are some of the disparities that we're seeing in terms of vaccine distribution or access?
Well, I'm here in Alexandria, Louisiana, and I know that a few of the sites that were supposed to have the vaccines, they closed, they pushed it back, they relocated, they did this, they did that. So people were supposed to be able to get the vaccine, and then people that did, want to get the vaccine weren't able to get it because now it's been changed, it's been closed, it's been relocated. They're changing it from this date to that date. Everyone doesn't have reliable transportation. Everybody doesn't have the schedule to be able to go at the drop of a dime. So people have to do what they can do when they can do it. And that's important too.
Right. And Kenya is giving us, like, it's so important. You're outlining the lived experience, right? The impact of that. Indy, can you talk to us about the sort of the back end, the sort of why and how we're getting, why we're seeing these disparities?
Well, look, Angela, I keep thinking about the various inequities that this country had entering the pandemic, and I honestly can't think of one that wasn't made worse by the pandemic. The pandemic basically took all those pre-existing inequities, exacerbated them, whether it's the challenges laid out in getting a vaccine, or you look at the job market. The fact is that on average, the higher paid folks have pretty much recovered. And that's probably why you're not seeing quite the focus on relief that we ought to be seeing. When you've got lower paid workers who are so far from recovery. If the economy had sort of grown as it should have, otherwise, friends at the Economic Policy Institute estimate we're over 12 million jobs in the hole. That's worse than the last recession.
Wow. That is an incredible stat. I had not heard that before. And it raising the how this pandemic has really doubled down on and made worse all of the inequities that we know were true before, the 2020, the spring or winter of 2020. It reminds me of the Fight for 15, right? That, you talked about. I know you've worked on, Angela, as well, Kenya, and thinking about that being an important part of. It's been a fight that has been called for a long time, but I can certainly remember at least 10 years. People have been demanding that this be a policy shift. Can we talk about why? Can Angela, and then maybe Indy, you can chime in as well. Can you talk about why it's important to include a policy like that in a relief package? That is, folks think about changing the minimum wage as more of a systemic change that we could maybe do over a longer term. But this is we're trying to move this as a part of an urgent relief package. Can you talk about why that's important?
Yeah, I think it's important because we've seen, as was mentioned before, a lot of these issues are not new. They've just been exacerbated with the pandemic. And what would have looked like if we already would have enacted a $15 an hour minimum wage 10 years ago when organizers first started? And so I think right now there's an opening to be able to talk about some of the structural issues that are being magnified right now. And I think there could have been an opportunity where if we would have, all the organizers that are working on things like paid sick days and the fight for 15, I'm curious, what would have looked like if we would have enacted those policies on the front end and we aren't sitting here trying to scramble because we're in the midst of a pandemic. And honestly, if I could push back just a tiny bit, we're talking about a $15 minimum wage. $15 an hour was okay 10 years ago when we were talking about it. Quite frankly, we need to be talking about $21, $22 because right now, $15 an hour doesn't seem as impactful as the way it was 10 years ago when we first started having these conversations. So now, quite frankly, it feels a little late, and we need to actually be talking about raising the minimum wage to actually catch up. It seems that by the time that everyone is comfortable with it, it's almost outdated. So we really need to be talking about moving forward. How are we institutionalizing some of these issues and these challenges, because we could have done this before and we could have been in an easier position and people wouldn't have to be struggling so hard if we would have addressed these policies in a systemic way earlier. And so I really do feel like there's an opening right now. If there is a silver lining in anything, then hopefully we can actually build the country and the society of our dreams, understanding all of the challenges that we have. We can really systemize a lot of these temporary relief packages or relief policies, but actually put them into place in a more permanent way moving forward.
That's right. And we're moving on this in this emergency way because we did not take action on the front end. And so we're really trying to play that catch up. And because we have this opportunity, it's really urgent that we do everything that we can to help people now, knowing that there was inaction for so many years. Indy, was there something you wanted to add on the minimum wage, the case for the $15 minimum wage raise?
Yeah. First, I should have said I go by he, him pronouns. But look, in many parts of the country, especially in the American South and to some extent even in the Southwest, there's pretty much no way the lowest paid workers are going to see a raise without a federal minimum wage increase. We saw what happened to Alabama when a majority Black city tried to raise the minimum wage. I mean, they did raise the minimum wage, and it was blocked by the state government, right? And in Alabama. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. And I do want to also just flag, we still live in a country where a huge share of workers rely on tips. And in particular, the tip minimum wage, I mean, you look at its history, basically people didn't want to pay wages to freed slaves. And we're still living with that to this day. The tip minimum wage is $2.13 an hour. Tips, of course, are supposed to make up the difference to the incredibly low federal minimum wage right now. By any standard, the federal minimum wage is extraordinarily low. And we have a chance, I think, also to undo this unjust sort of history. And as a practical matter, and I know Angela Peoples and others here know this well, but our Senate is not structured well to facilitate wildly popular policies like raising the minimum wage to go through. And if you're going to do it, you're probably going to have to do it with a simple majority vote, which is something that you can do through the same process that this reconciliation package, as it's called, this relief plan, the American Rescue Plan, is moving forward under. So there's a real case to be made to keep pushing and try to include a minimum wage increase in this big relief plan.
That is such a great point. We're talking about this relief package that we need to move in the context of a political triumph for progressive ideas, for Democratic voters, right? The issues of a $15 minimum wage were most certainly on the ballot in November. The issue of relief from this for this pandemic crisis was certainly on the ballot, and voters chose to put candidates in place that said that they were going to move on these issues, even while we're also, to your point, Indy, in a structure where folks who, while their constituents are wildly supportive of policies like raising the minimum wage, they choose not to, and it is certainly even more of the case to really move with the urgency and haste for passing this relief now. Kenya, I wanted to turn it to you, and of course, please share if your experience with the minimum wage and why it's important to raise. But I also wanted to ask you a question about the challenges that families are facing. I know you're a mother, and I'm guessing that you also are a resource and an anchor in your community, supporting other families. Just knowing Black women activists as I do. So I would love if you can just share a little bit about some of the challenges that families, yours or others, are facing as that you feel are going unnoticed in the conversation about relief.
Things that are going unnoticed about the relief.
Or just some of the impacts.
Mothers in particular, mothers are just expected to have time. They don't realize that we have to make time. We're living in a Zoom world, like everything is virtual. That puts a strain on mothers. That's making introverts more introverted. It's putting a strain on households, even two-parent households. It's hard. Let alone most families are one parent or a grandparent, especially in urban communities. So those are the things that people don't just necessarily know that come from two households and different types of living. When you've lived a different walk of life, things are different. They're very different for others.
And that impact, the making the time, the needing to be on Zoom, the needing to make time to deal with the emotional impact on our children, on our siblings, our parents, right? The additional work of caring needs to be compensated in some way.
Definitely. I remember when I was living in California, I'm a California native, and in high school, it was like $5.75 an hour. So like now that was 20 years ago. So now for $15 an hour, it's like, that's like literally the numbers, the cost of living is extremely high. I've said that multiple times, like the cost of living is really, really high. And $15 an hour just doesn't cut it, especially when there's only one income in the household with multiple children. How are you supposed to make it?
Absolutely. And we're seeing so many folks try to get back into the workforce, try to have, struggling to bring in even that one income when our economy has been needed to be shut down in these, kind of different ways or just slowed down. So this is we're also experiencing this. And I really appreciate this conversation so much because while we're talking about the need for relief now, and I also want to encourage folks to share their stories on Twitter and on Facebook and social media using the hashtag #ReliefNow. Share your stories on social media so we can add that into this conversation. But one of the things I appreciate so much about what we're able to discuss is how these moments are not and these challenges are not new, they are compounded. And that's why we need to be moving with urgency. We don't have time to debate whether or not we should wait. We don't have time to debate whether or not that last package was enough. This is the second major economic crisis in a little more than 10 years. And this might be worse than the 2008 crisis if not handled properly. Indy, can you share and say, what do you see as some of the commonalities that you're seeing in these crises? And I'm also interested in, your awareness of what some of the changes or interventions that were made or not made at the time, right, in 2008 and 2009 to address that crisis. What were the missed opportunities that we can learn from now in order to make the case for relief?
That's a great question, Angela. I think one fundamental similarity is that policymakers start by responding with too little. They have this wait and see sort of attitude, which we keep hearing to this day, but I don't know what they need to wait for with, nearly 500,000 people dead. And we just saw a reversal of 22 years of progress in Black life expectancy in the first 6 months of last year. So it's kind of unfathomable. We have to think of it as sort of being more like wartime. You sort of need to just marshal the resources and do what it takes. And the one difference is, whatever people's disagreements might be with him, I think right now the president and the White House haven't given in, and they continue to insist that what they're pushing for is what's needed. I remember when I think President Obama at some point said something like, families are tightening their belts, and so we need to too as a federal government. And I think he must have known that's not the right way to think about it at all. And in fact, I always get this wrong, but the right way to think about it is, I think what the Prime Minister of Canada said, which is let the government go into debt so you don't have to. And in fact, I'm much more optimistic this time. Congress did act more quickly, and maybe because some folks there were worried about Wall Street, while others were hopefully worried about working people and regular households. But we got something done, and in a lot of ways, we can go back to what they did last March, especially the CARES Act, and see that there's very little risk of doing too much here, and there's a lot of risk of doing too little still to this day. So, we had $600. I mean, it's one thing I do want to emphasize. We ended up spending probably over $700+ billion last year in unemployment benefits. It actually dwarfed all the spending on relief checks. Now, unemployment assistance is way too hard to navigate. It's way too hard to get. But that $600 weekly benefit, that was huge, and people were worried about the sky falling, and nothing of the sort happened. It just kept people together.
It allowed folks to make their ends meet. And I think that, the point you make about the unemployment benefits is actually right. We do spend a lot on unemployment benefits as we should. We need to help folks that aren't able to work, cover those costs. But if we make other investments that might be less costly, like or less or more easy to administer, so more accessible, right? Like like sending folks checks, right? Like those relief checks, like raising the minimum wage. If we can do these things on the front end, we may be able to save costs and also save time and heartache for folks by making these other investments. I think there's we were also talking a little bit about, to your point, indeed, folks are saying we need to wait and see. Again, not sure what we need to wait and see, but, there is a call to say, well, let's wait and see folks till everybody gets vaccinated. And maybe we don't need to do a lot of relief right now. Angela, do you think that we could wait until those vaccines are administered? What do you think about that?
I mean, my first gut is like, are these bills gonna wait and see? Because bills need to get paid now, right? Like, what are you waiting and seeing? Because bills don't stop. I remember back in the day, I was raised by a single white mother who had terminal cancer and still had to go to work the day after she would do chemotherapy, because what she used to say, she's like, I may be dying, but these bills don't stop. And that resonated, like that hit me. But it's also a lot of what our communities are experiencing. And we don't wait and see when we give corporate tax breaks. We don't do any analysis there. But when working people who tend to be Black and brown and the most marginalized, then we have to wait and see. So unless these bills can wait and see, I don't need why we need to continue to wait and see.
Period. That makes a lot of sense to me. If the bill collector is going to stay on hold, then maybe Congress could take a break, but I doubt that they're going to make any sort of concessions on that way. Kenya, can you, we're talking about, we're making the case for a relief package now, but the reality is that, we have members of Congress who are getting, they're pretty, some of them are pretty entrenched. Some of them they're not listening to their constituents. What would you say? What do you want members of Congress? What's the message that you want to send to them on why that we need relief right now? What would you say?
They need to lead with their hearts, lead with compassion, be transparent, and provide us with the facts. We've all been through enough, Congress included. So they need to keep that in mind when they're passing these bills, especially when it's affecting us.
Yeah, we have all been through a lot. And I appreciate also the call for honesty and transparency. I think that's so necessary right now. Like, we're in a pandemic. This is a global crisis. I think that there's so much energy put into Congress and the White House, even sometimes almost infantilizing folks, right? Making it seem that people can't deal with the complex challenges of spending a lot more money now because we have a lot more of an urgent need right now. Right? They do this thing where they make it as though people don't understand these complex challenges and can't deal with that. And I think that your point is absolutely right. Like, we tell us the truth and lead with your hearts and move forward with some compassion. Angela, I want to ask you also, and Indy and Kenya, as we're moving into our final question. So we're talking about a recovery, a stimulus, a relief package. But to everyone's point earlier that we've said, this is just one drop in the bucket of the challenges that so many of our communities and our families are facing. So after we get this bold stimulus package passed, and shout out to all of the members of Congress that are holding the line, shout out to the folks in the White House that are trying to push for this package to be bold. We're with you. We want you to continue to keep fighting. But after we get this relief, what do you think needs to happen next? Angela, let's start with you.
I would say it needs to continue. Right? We need to make sure, and I said this earlier, we need to make sure that we're consistent. As long as there is a pandemic, that is as long as people are hurting. And we also need to understand the long-term impacts of this and the things that are going unnoticed as well, the increased mental health challenges. If we're all under a stay-at-home order, we need to acknowledge that some people's homes are not safe for them. There's increased domestic violence. And so also understanding the long-term impact. How are we healing as a country? How are we healing as a community? How are we holding each other? And up until the night before Inauguration Day, we weren't even collectively grieving the almost 500,000 people that we lost. And so not only do we need to continue to provide relief for folks, we need to also have an assessment of these long-term impacts of both mentally, but also financially, and what does this mean for our country moving forward?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Indy?
Well, I just completely agree with everything Angela said. I would add that after we move beyond full, fast, and fair, which I think are great principles for this relief package, if we really want an equitable recovery and economy, I think we need to highlight the three principles that I've been pushing, which are substantial, sustained, and structural. What I mean by that is we have to keep going big, and there are these plans, Build Back Better, that need to include some of these ideas. Sustained, I mean, that goes along with what Angela was just talking about, crises for families, and long after policymakers typically think that they've done their job, to say the least. And structural, I mean, we entered these crises, the massive reduction in economic activity and the pandemic, with just incredibly weak social infrastructure. And every time people talk about sort of infrastructure, we need infrastructure investments. I do like to bring up the fact that we have incredible needs for social infrastructure. And that means things like childcare for every kid who needs one. We don't have the sort of system to do that. I want to make sure that we come out of this crisis, these crises really far stronger than when we entered them. And I think that's the responsibility of policymakers. And that means we should nationalize the unemployment insurance system. There's no reason for states to run these programs. It leads to extraordinary racial disparities across states. They're candidly just ill-equipped to handle the programs in many cases. And we need, ongoing, we recommend weekly benefit for anyone who's searching for a job who's unemployed and doesn't qualify for unemployment insurance. It's a job seekers allowance, and the idea that I think if we had entering these crises, it would have made a huge difference. I mean, imagine a weekly check, not even monthly, but weekly, to everyone who's in the labor force.
I mean, I think that, people could stay home, and then maybe we wouldn't have so many cases. What are we at, like 4 or 5 million right now? Like we would not be in this situation. So true. So many really great points. Kenya, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on, what do you think needs to happen next?
Angela and Indy pretty much covered it, but I also believe that getting us access to resources regarding the vaccinations, I can't stress that enough. And while they're considering that, we also need to look at housing and how that has been impacted and how we get those displaced due to the finances back housed. But so to speak, that would be a few of the things that I had outside of what Angela and Indy said, because Angela pretty much covered it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that the point about the vaccines is so important to continue to hit home, because so much of the plans for reopening, so much of the plans for moving forward, for recovery, for building back better depend on us having a safe workforce, a healthy workforce. And for people to be able to go to school, to be able to visit their families, to be able to travel, right? And we're already seeing, to some of the points about the vaccine disparities, we're already seeing the racism and the class differences that we know are plaguing so many other policies rise to the top and make it so that those that have money, those that are white, have access to understanding of resources, are getting the vaccine, and that means they're going to be able to recover faster than others. And so it is so important, and I'm so grateful that you continue to bring this up, Kenya. We need more information. We need more awareness about the vaccine. Before I transition and move to a closing, I did want to share and thank some of the folks that have brought in their stories into the conversation. So Justin on Facebook said that he's lucky to still be working, but it has been slow, and he's been having to getting less hours than usual. His last car broke down and he had to buy a new one. Now he's behind on bills. Erica on Facebook said that she has a set. Oh dear. Sorry, my apologies. Erica on Facebook said that she was set to open a restaurant in May of 2020. She also owns her own small cleaning business. A small cleaning business. She works with vacation rental properties, but since no one can travel, she's been hit really hard. And she also said that small businesses have been hit the hardest. And I definitely, that resonates so much with me. I live in South Florida, and the travel, the lack of tourism has really been such a topic for so many small businesses. The big hotels, they're okay. They're getting the relief from the corporate relief packages that have come out, but it's really the smaller shops that are struggling. So thank you, Erica, and we're definitely with you. David said, I just got let go after 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears. 2020 put me in a hole, and it's still kicking me back in as soon as I climb up. Amanda said, I was laid off from my job of 10 years. I lost my first car and recently lost my home. Sold so many personal belongings just to feed my kids. I want to give up, but my son keeps me fighting. I have been independent since a teen, and this is the first time in my life that I feel helpless. Sending prayers to all the families who are suffering. Thank you, Justin, Erica, David, and Amanda. We see you. We're with you. And for everyone else who's watching, everyone else that is sharing their stories, talking with their families about this, just know that those stories, that you're not alone. And we're sending you all love. And also we have the power to come together to move these actions forward. We have the power to get relief now. We saw it in the last election cycle. And I don't want folks to forget, many of us that tend to be activists or tend to be, mobilized around some of these issues. It's easy to think that things are not moving forward. It's easy to get frustrated that we're still waiting for checks. We're still waiting for progress. But the truth is, the fact that the $15 minimum wage is in this package, and that members of Congress and that the folks in the White House are fighting to keep it in there is due to the work that we've done together. The fact that we are getting this relief bill that is not as much as it should be, but is more than it would be if we had not come together. So I just wanted to lift that up, that this moment is a reminder of what we can do together. And that's why I want to thank you all for being a part of this conversation. I want to thank Indy and Kenya and Angela. And I'll just open the floor before we wrap. If you all want to offer any concluding thoughts in response to some of those stories that were shared that we received.
I'll jump in if that's all right, Angela. First,
Yep.
I mean, thanks for sharing those stories. And the first story underscores why we need to get aid, including through direct cash payments to folks who haven't lost their jobs. People are struggling seeing income losses even if they haven't lost their jobs. The second story just sort of underscores for me that what policymakers do now, it's really going to affect people's lives permanently. People often think that there's this idea that we can sort of imagine that we sort of come back from and make up from the damage of recessions. It doesn't really work that way, not for humans, not for real people. And it took over 7 years to close the jobs gap, essentially creating enough jobs to offset the loss in jobs and the growth in the population after the last recession. 7 years. We can't afford to wait. People can't afford to wait. They often can't afford to wait 7 days. So I hope policymakers just keep in mind that what they do now will have effects for years to come.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. Kenya, did you want to chime in on the story?
I just wanted to let
thoughts? Yeah,
that last story just really, really hit home because I've seen it happen time and time again, and it's unfortunate. So it's stories like that. Things are going on like that every day. People don't see it, so they don't believe it. Like if you're not in that type of world, you're not aware. Same thing with people with autism. Like if you're not in that type of world, you don't know what goes on until you've actually walked it. We're here on the front lines. We're walking the walk. We're talking the talk. And we just wanted to, I personally wanted to send love to that last person with that last story because I totally understand and want to encourage everyone to just keep fighting, stay strong, don't give up. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Things will get better. We're going to continue to push and push and push and make noise until something gives. We have to.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. And that was Amanda who shared that story. And we're definitely with you, Angela.
Yeah, these stories, no matter how many you hear different stories like this, they're never any less tragic and heartbreaking. I feel like my heart has been hurting for a year now, hearing these stories. I think what I want to say to folks is that I know there's a lot of attention on the November election. Everyone thinks that like, okay, it's done and over with. But it's also important for us to like see our votes through, to make sure that we are, holding these people accountable. We're telling these politicians, stop playing politics with our lives, because that is exactly what is happening. These are life and death situations for some folks. And I want to also uplift all the challenges that are happening in Texas as well. Imagine going through a pandemic, having all of those issues and these heartbreaking stories, and then having your water get cut off or pipes breaking in your house and all of these things. And imagine all of that. And to have, people saying, oh, well, people would suffer through this, given the way that our power grid is structured. People are okay with suffering this, and people are not. And the people that haven't suffered are the people that actually think that the suffering is okay. And people need to understand that these are people's lives. These are people's families. And I think it's sick and disgusting that when people are crying out for help, we're saying, but we need to consider this. We're saying but when people are asking for help in these life or death situations, and we need to do everything that we can. If we have this electoral power and we did what we did in November, we need to make sure we're holding people accountable. Make sure that you are questioning your U.S. senators. I'm from the great state of Wisconsin. Ron Johnson is one of our senators, and he has made it very clear that he is only serving the interests of billionaires while working people are struggling, and he consistently votes against relief for people. And people need to pay attention to that because midterms are right around the corner, but there's a lot that we can do to send the signal that you need to stop playing politics with our lives.
Absolutely. And speaking of what we can do, I just want to let folks know if you're feeling motivated. I know I am after those stories, after this amazing information and the expert awareness. If you're feeling motivated to take action, here's how you can do it. You can contact your member of Congress and demand that they pass full, fast, and fair COVID relief now. You can reach your member of Congress by dialing area code 202-931-0843. It'll connect you to your member of Congress. You can also write letters. You can tag your elected officials on social media. I hear they really like that. And you can also send emails through their websites. The bottom line is that there is no time for lawmakers to put partisan politics over people's lives. There's no time for the what ifs, for the wait and sees. When people are struggling, people are suffering, people are hanging on by a string. We've lost so many of our family members, our neighbors. We've lost so many, hundreds of thousands of people. And just to COVID, we don't know how many other people we've lost to suicide, to depression, to substance abuse, to overdose because of the circumstances of this year and of this crisis. So there is no more time to waste. We have to act now, not just to save the economy, not just to get people back to work, to save lives. So I just want to thank all of you. I want to thank Endy. I want to thank Angela. I want to thank Kenya for everything that you all are doing, for being here this evening. I want to thank Tax March for pulling us together. To the folks that shared your stories, we are sending you love, and we're with you. We're here together. And thank you, everybody that has joined the conversation. And you can still use the hashtag Relief Now. We'll be following that, and folks will be able to respond and give you more information if you're looking to get involved or just need some resources and support. Thank you all so much, and I hope that you all have a safe and blessed rest of your days.